And welcome to Dean Obeidallah Show, sisters and brothers. We're live here Tuesday, January 21st. As always, I'm here to be your MBFF, and a lot to cover today. A lot going on in terms of executive orders. And today was a prayer event where Trump went with J.D. Vance. And there was really an amazing moment when Reverend Marion Budd, the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, made a plea to both of them, right to their face, from the podium, about showing compassion and empathy for people, for the LGBTQ community, for migrants, for people in general. And I really encourage you to go watch the video, not now, when the show's on later, but later, and watch Trump and J.D. Vance, scoff at it and roll their eyes. To them, empathy and compassion are weakness. What they celebrate is cruelty, meanness, toxicity. That's what they're about. And here is, about a minute and a half, Reverend Budd today. And she's saying this all to Trump and J.D. Vance's face. They're sitting in the audience, but right in the front. And the camera's on Trump and J.D. Vance. And you should see the eye rolling and everything. Here's clip number 1.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away.
It's falling on deaf ears in terms of Trump. It means nothing. But what I like is that the clip went viral. It's everywhere. It's a moment of resistance. And it's the little things like that I hope inspire others, Democrats, to speak out. Although tomorrow, if things go well, we have Senator Chris Van Hollen and Representative Ilhan Omar on, and we will talk about their plans for resistance. They're both fighters. And so I'm looking forward to chatting with them tomorrow and talking about how they're taking the fight to Trump and MAGA. And they both are. But, is he getting the headlines it deserves? No. But we're going to do all we can to amplify the voice of fighters to inspire people. That's why Reverend Budd's clip today is great, and it's going everywhere. And it really typifies the difference between MAGA and Americans. Americans, we are about compassion and empathy. Even conservative Americans, honestly, they have compassion and empathy. MAGA doesn't. MAGA is about cruelty, viciousness. It's about crushing the enemy, destroying them, demonizing them. They don't care. That's what MAGA is about. So there's MAGA values and there's American values. And they don't overlap. They really don't. So yesterday, as I warned people on Friday, Trump would do shock and awe with his executive orders. And he signed a lot when we were on air and then into the night as well. Last night, a bunch of them. And, we will cover some here and there when it deals with policy. And there is one we'll cover either tonight or tomorrow in more depth, which is the one where Trump's trying to rewrite the 14th Amendment to end birthright citizenship. And to me, it's the concern that Trump thinks he can rewrite a constitutional amendment by the stroke of a pen that is deeply concerning. 22 attorney generals have just filed a lawsuit against Trump on this birthright citizenship, and other organizations immediately filed lawsuits. They knew this was coming. And we have Raul Reyes on the top of the hour. And Raul's an attorney and also an activist in the immigration area. So we'll talk about it a little bit more at length. It's a Hail Mary. Their goal is to get the Supreme Court to find that, nope, if you're not here, and it's not even, I went through the executive order, and I'll talk about it more with Raul and then Danny Savalas later in the show. But there's two prongs to it. But in any event, their goal is to make it harder and harder for people to get citizenship in America who, in their view, are not white. I mean, that's the brutal reality of what we're dealing with. But that'll be challenged in court. And to remind everybody, all you need is one federal district judge, to impose an injunction, and it's nationwide. So all we need is one Democratic judge in some place in the nation with all these lawsuits to say, I'm enjoining this now until the appellate process is over because likelihood of success by the plaintiffs, which in this case the AGs, is so great that it would cause irreparable harm to allow this to go into effect. Now, the appellate Court of Appeals could end up overturning it. We'll see how it goes. But so much of the executive orders signed by Trump will be slowed down, delayed. Some will be completely stopped. Some will go through. But it will not be this tsunami or avalanche of transformative change that they envision. But there's one thing that can't be challenged in the courts, and that's what I want to talk about. And it's personal to me on some level. And I come to terms with this, and I really do. And that's Donald Trump's pardon of the January 6th terrorists. And I'll share at the end of this why it's personal. If you've listened to the show in the past, you probably have an idea why it is. But last night, the news broke when we were on air with Pam Keith that Donald Trump had pardoned every single terrorist, every single one. Not just the ones who did misdemeanors and trespassed, but those who brutally beat up police officers. The Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, all of them. And those who have not been brought to trial yet, who are charged with very serious crimes, their cases are done as well. So, I was talking to Pam, and she was on, and it was so upsetting, it was hard to think straight. Like, I just wanted to get off air and read the executive order and then come back on air and talk about it, which I did today, of course, and I want to talk about it now. Just so it's clear, let's begin with the facts that are undisputed. January 6th, that was an act of domestic terrorism. That's not my opinion, although I agree with it. Christopher Wray, the FBI director, and the Department of Justice have said, testimony point blank, based on federal law, January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism. And we all know that it was violence designed to had a political goal, which was overturning the election. So we all know that, which means that people who engage in actual violence are terrorists. Those who trespass, I think it's hard to say they're actual terrorists, but they are criminals. And I don't think anyone should get a pardon because overwhelmingly, people who were prosecuted didn't get jail time. They got probation, they paid a fine, they went home, that was it. The ones who got jail were bad, really bad people. But my blood was literally boiling. I was so angry at this. And overall, the pardons covered more than 600 terrorists who were charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding law enforcement officers. Approximately 175 of those people had used deadly or dangerous weapons. Toxic bear sprays, baseball bats, 2x4s, MAGA flags, hockey sticks, broken wooden tables, aluminum poles, anything they could find to beat the police officers. We have video of it. We've all seen it. We see it and get disgusted. MAGA sees it and gets excited. Understand, that's the difference. I kept saying for years, polls showed of MAGA, 55% to 60% viewed that January 6th terrorist attack as an act defending freedom. They weren't disgusted by it. They were excited. They were proud by it. They were proud of it. To me, Trump pardoning these terrorists is no different than if bin Laden could have pardoned the 9/11 terrorists and everybody involved. It's no different. Donald Trump was the organizer of the January 6th terrorist attack. Without him, there's no attack. Even Trumpers listening, you know that. If he just accepts his loss, there's nothing. Nobody goes to the Capitol. There's no protest. There's no march. That's nothing. You just move on. He created this. He radicalized people for months and months with lies, brought them there, told them to be there. It's going to be wild, and sent them down to the Capitol to stop the steal, saying the word fight and fighting 20 times. The people Trump pardoned, the really bad ones, have no place being on the streets of our society. They belong in a prison cell. People like Julian Cater. He pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement officers with pepper spray. He even sprayed Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the next day. There's also Ronald Colton McCabe, a former sheriff's deputy sentenced to nearly 6 years in jail for assaulting police officers. As the Department of Justice detailed in their pleadings, I went back and read some of this, he held down a police officer who had been knocked to the ground, kicked and stripped of his baton by other rioters, enabling the crowd to viciously beat the officer. The defendant McCabe His action resulted in the officer sustaining physical injuries, including head laceration, concussion, elbow injury, bruising, and bodily abrasions. There's Daniel Joseph DJ Rodriguez. He used a stun gun on Michael Fanone. The officer has been on TV a lot. And other acts of violence against the police. He was sentenced to 12 and a half years. He would still be in prison. He's out now. He's walking the streets. There's David Dempsey, who prosecutors, quote, called, quote, one of the most violent January 6 attackers. He assaulted and injured numerous officers. Numerous. He had pepper spray he brought with him. He had tactical gear he brought with him. He used a metal crutch, chairs, and a long wooden pole. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail. That's how dangerous. Do you know to get 20 years when you have no priors, how bad your conduct has to be? 20 years. He's out today. He's walking the streets. Thanks to Donald Trump. Then the leaders of the militant groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, who had been convicted of seditious conspiracy. Seditious conspiracy is on par with treason. It's using violence against the United States government. The only reason it's not treason is that it wasn't helping a declared enemy of America, but it's no different. So seditious conspiracy is rarely charged. It was a Civil War type charge, but these guys were charged with it and convicted. Enrico Terrio, Stuart Rhodes, and others sentenced to nearly 20 years in prison. As DOJ noted, the Oath Keepers, for example, quote, plotted to oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power. These people planned. They trained. They recruited. I was reading it today. For example, one thing here that was part of the evidence. They came to D.C. on January 6th with paramilitary gear and supplies, including firearms, tactical vests with plates, helmets, and radio equipment. They had a rapid response force right over the river in Virginia with a horde of weapons. These guys were ready to start a civil war in their view. All for Trump. And all the pleadings show they did it for Trump. The Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and you can see it's all public record. They were instantaneously communicating with each other when Trump was lying about the election being stolen. We got to get in there. We have to save our country. Trump needs us. Trump's calling us to D.C. Trump did call them. Trump did want them there. Trump did want them to train. He did want them to bring firearms and tactical vests and radio equipment and prepare. That's what Trump wanted. He built an army on purpose. This army was because the legal means were all failing. It was his backup plan to stay in power. These are violent and dangerous people. Many of them have military experience and tactical planning skills. These are dangerous, dangerous people. And now they're free. Now they walk our streets. They brutally beat hundreds of officers. Over 140 had serious type of injuries. Vertebrae broken. Injuries, lacerations. At least 4, if not more, committed suicide in the days that followed. Brian Sicknick died the next day from the injuries. Many of the police officers who loved being police officers, including Sergeant Gunnell and Michael Fanone, who were on our show, and Harry Dunn, a lot of them retired because of the injuries they sustained. Many of them are still in pain every single day. Every minute of the day, they have pain from the injuries of this. But Trump released them. And this is the platform of the GOP. Trump ran on this. At the MAGA rallies, they would cheer when he would talk about the terrorists. They loved it. They want more of this. And Trump did this for a reason we've covered on the show. Like any aspiring dictator, he wants to make a public showing. That's why he did this on day one, before anything else. This was his big day one executive order. He's sending a message. If you commit a crime for me, I've got your back. That's his message. If you commit violence on my behalf, I've got your back. I'm going to pardon you. I just pardoned everyone. There was no break it down, only misdemeanors. No, everyone, whoever committed violence, a crime, seditious conspiracy, a terrorist attack on the Capitol, I've got your back. And that's not just my view. I had Ruth Ben-Ghiat on numerous times, an authoritarian expert. And I went back and looked at some of the interviews. And she told me, first, Trump, like other fascist leaders, is trying to change the perception of violence, to get people to see that violence is not negative. She noted Trump is conditioning his supporters to believe that violence is sometimes morally necessary and even righteous and patriotic. That's why he did the whole January 6th, all his rallies. He had the January 6th singers. They did the choir, and everyone has to stand up for the wrongly detained terrorists. And Trump sang with them and cheered them and said they were patriots and they were hostages. Because, as Ruth Ben-Ghiat said, what he was doing was priming his base, others who were there listening, to understand that sometimes violence in the service of Donald Trump and the MAGA agenda is righteous. It's even patriotic. And as to Trump's promise of pardons, and this is before yesterday, I talked to her months ago, and she was on the show talking about this, she noted all authoritarians use pardons because why do you want people sitting in jail? The worst people in the world. And that's how others view them, as the worst people in the world. But for the dictator, for the Trump, they're the best people. They're the people you want free because you need them. And then Ruth Ben-Ghiat said the bone-chilling truth, that Donald Trump would pardon. She predicted all the January 6 attackers if he won because, quote, the pardons are about encouraging people to do more violence, thinking they're not going to pay any consequences. And she added, that's actually the essence of authoritarianism and fascism. You arrange government so that you can be violent and corrupt and get away with it. And that's what we're seeing. A government that is violent and corrupt and you can get away with it. The corruption's off the charts. It's embarrassing what's happening in our country. With the oligarchs, we are a third world nation. The billionaires surrounding Trump, just whatever they want. And those billionaires there yesterday, they own all this because they helped Trump win. And now these terrorists are out there. Now, some people were surprised. There are a handful of Republicans now critical of it, of the idea of pardoning the violent terrorists, as opposed to just those who trespassed and came in there. J.D. Vance, and I'll play the clip, was on just last week on TV, saying Trump, of course, will not pardon the violent terrorists. Here's clip number 2.
January 6 pardons, President Trump says there's a process. Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
So you heard him. Violence, no pardon. Peaceful pardon. Well, no, that didn't happen. Speaker Mike Johnson, a few days ago, said peaceful protesters should be pardoned, but violent criminals should not. But Trump didn't care. Trump doesn't care what his vice president thinks. He tried to have the last one killed on January 6th. I think he cares? He doesn't care about anyone. You're all, any MAGA person listening, you are completely expendable to Trump. And Trump doesn't care that polling shows 2/3 of Americans, in a recent poll, 2/3 of Americans oppose these pardons for any of the January 6 attackers, and it goes even up higher when they're talking about the violent ones. But Trump doesn't care about that. He only cares about the MAGA base. And guess what a recent Washington Post poll found? While 2/3 of real Americans oppose pardons for the terrorists, of self-identified MAGA people, 70%, yes, 70% support these pardons. And of course they do. It's their people. It was their act of patriotism. They attacked the Capitol for their beloved Donald Trump. They are more loyal to Trump than the United States of America. I say that with no hesitance whatsoever. The diehard MAGA core supporter, completely with Trump. America's a secondary thought. Or in their mind, they're intertwined. Given that fascists and aspiring autocrats follow the same playbook, it's never original. Don't be surprised if Donald Trump next forms his own MAGA militia, the same way Hitler formed and created his brown shirts. And they were infamous for their operation outside of the law and their violent intimidation of Germany's leftists. Us. And come January 6th next year, expect Trump to hold a ceremony to honor those who waged the January 6th attack, especially Ashley Babbitt, who was killed. And I can say that because Hitler did the same thing. He had a coup in 1923. It failed. When he became chancellor in 1933, one of the first things he did was an annual tribute to honor those who were killed in his attempted coup. Trump's going to do that because it's never original. They use the same playbook because it works. It's effective. Why change the game up? But thankfully, we got the Democrats fighting hard. Here's Chuck Schumer today reading a statement from a podium. This should be really stop Republicans. Here's clip number 3, please.
And sadly, it's a golden age for lawlessness and lawbreakers who were pardoned yesterday by President Trump. There is no other way to describe President Trump's pardon of January 6th offenders than un-American. It is so deeply un-American to do that, to pardon them. And let's be clear, President Trump didn't just pardon protesters. He pardoned individuals convicted of assaulting police officers. He pardoned individuals convicted of seditious conspiracy. And he pardoned those who attempted to undermine our democracy. It's a betrayal of the highest order of our Capitol Police officers who risked their lives to keep us safe.
Yep, that was pretty engaging. I really feel inspired now. I've said it over and over. Chuck Schumer, take an improv class. You need an improv class. Bring some life to what you're saying. The words are good. Just, we need a better messenger. That's the truth, and we all know that. I watched MSNBC this morning. Actually, I was at the gym listening, and Jose Diaz-Balart was hosting, and he had Paulo Ramos on, who had spoken to a Proud Boy, one of the Proud Boys, who was convicted of crimes for January 6th, was sentenced for a year in jail, and is out, not from the pardon, was out already, and was still wearing an ankle bracelet. And Paulo talked to the person, and he said he's really happy, and Paulo said, how do you feel now? And he said, well, I have no regrets. I would do it again. I would do the attack again. But Paulo said, but a year ago I interviewed you, and you said you regretted it, and you had remorse. He said, I was lying. I was lying then. I have no regret whatsoever. And then he said, what's your message to people out there now that the January 6th people are out? His exact words are, there are no safe spaces. There are no safe spaces. They want to come for us. They want to intimidate us. They want to scare us. And that's what Trump wants. Understand that. This is a war. I told people it'll get darker than you want to imagine. On day one, Trump gave us a taste of what we're going to see. Coming attractions. It's going to get ugly. Trump is going to call on these people to commit acts of violence. As long as they're federal crimes, he will pardon them. And the reason I say there's something personal in all of this is that in the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump demonized Muslims, saying things like, we know where the terrorists are and we won't turn them in. He said they're going to have to turn in the people, those terrorists. And he goes, they know who those people are, and we're not going to find the people by just continuing to be so nice and so soft. And Donald Trump talked about killing the families of the terrorists to deter them. And the result was hate crimes against Muslim Americans here. Well, in this case, Donald Trump knows who the terrorists are because they're his terrorists. And now he has freed them. Donald Trump, in his speech yesterday, talked about law and order. When in reality, Donald Trump is the most lawless terrorist. And again, thank you, Merrick Garland, and thank you, Merrick Garland defenders and apologists for getting us here. Donald Trump pardoned terrorists to build an army. That's how I view it. I could be wrong. Time will tell. But we know they've committed violence numerous times before January 6th, and I'm pretty confident to say they will commit violence in the future for Donald Trump. And he has a possibility, an opportunity to do so, he will pardon them. And on Fox News, they will all defend that. They will defend all the attacks. Trump, MAGA could kill your family, and Trump will defend it, and Fox News will defend it. Understand that. They will come up with some reason why they had to kill your family. Understand that's what you're dealing with. Please understand that. That's the truth. So Trump is not a genius, but no one understands his base better than him. He knows how to inspire them to vote, how to buy scam products, and how to engage in violence. The partying and the January 6 terrorists are all part of Trump's plan to wield power by any means necessary for an indefinite period of time. Indefinitely. Not 4 years, indefinitely. And it might come a point where Democrats have to decide, are you going to engage in violence to take your nation back? I'm not advocating that, but there might be a point in time where that happens. Because he's not leaving. He is not leaving in 4 years. If he's physically capable, he is not leaving. He's getting more angry and bitter. He's a dangerous man. And we'll see. I mean, he's an older man. Maybe the devil will call him back to hell. I mean, that's where he's going, and that's where he belongs. And he's clearly a spawn of hell. He's a devil's advocate on our planet. And I say that sincerely as someone who believes in faith. I think he's a manifestation of Satan. He's sent here to divide us and turn us against each other, to celebrate cruelty and meanness, and to mock compassion and empathy. Who else is that? Whose work is he doing? So, what is your reaction to Donald Trump's pardon of the terrorists? Even though J.D. Vance just said, and I played the clip for you, not going to pardon the violent ones. He did it. What is his end game? What do you think Trump's trying to do? And what would you like to see of Democrats in response to this, besides Chuck Schumer reading a statement in front of a podium in the basement of the Senate? Anything? 866-997-4748. Give me a call. I'll be right back. We'll take your calls right after this break.
Dean Obeidallah Show on SiriusXM Progress 120.